Asher's body was found by Wayne Buechler, her nephew, who divided his time between staying with his aunt at her apartment in Phoenix and working on his parents' land in the outlying farm community of Buckeye. On the evening of April 13th, Wayne headed to the city on foot since he didn't own a car. Just as Small completed his bloody work, Bueller turned his busy corner of 15th Avenue and Thomas Road. Using his own key, he entered the usually quiet apartment. Ashler's lapdog didn't even greet him with his high-pitched, yippish bark. Then he saw his aunt slumped on the floor in a pool of still fresh blood. The slow-formed guilty plea in its high point with the introduction of Small's two confessions, one to Laura Street, the mother of his son, Raymond, the other to Leslie Habash, the most recent female interest. After murdering Asher, Small had gone on a midnight drive around Phoenix, stopping first at the apartment he shared with his roommate, Alan Grant. There, he took all his belongings and packed them into the stolen 1968 Chevrolet Bel Air. He drove to the projects where Laura Street lived with his son and her 4 other children. Knocking on her door at 1:30 a.m., he offered all his possessions to Laura and Raymond. Why? He had told Laura he was leaving town because he thought he'd killed a woman. He confessed that he had hit her on the head with a hammer and stabbed her in the belly and throat and killed her tiny dog. He had done this because he had beat her out of some money or something. Street asked Small if he was sure the woman was dead. He answered that she should be. Defense attorney Bueller asked Street if Small told her that morning that he had to accept the blame for this act because otherwise his son would be in danger or even killed. No, he didn't say that, she deadpanned. Small gave his second confession to the newest woman in his life, Leslie Habash. Pulling the sting himself before the defense counsel could, Prosecutor Braden asked House to admit her unseemly past before unfolding her tale. Only 20 years old, she admitted to her conviction for prostitution and a pending charge for possession of dangerous drugs. She then told the jury she met Wayman Small on April 10, 1977 at an apartment complex off 7th Street as she stood outside waiting for a ride. Small was driving a 1968 Chevrolet Bel Air. He stopped and asked her if she needed a lift. Small told Habash he was doing really well and putting up money into investments and getting himself situated. Small asked her to move into an apartment with him. She told him she would think about it. The next afternoon, Habash saw Small at her friend's apartment and told him that she would be shooting pool in a tournament that evening. Small told her he was going to see some woman about getting some money and see if the carpet had dried. She saw Small the next morning at 5:45 a.m. and he said he had to leave Phoenix because he had murdered a woman and ripped her off for $600. Small said he had taken samples of the carpet to the woman's apartment, but she came after him with a hammer and a knife. So he grabbed her by the legs, beat her on the head with the hammer, cut her throat, and killed her dog, cutting his thumb during the scuffle. Small told Habash he wanted her to go to Ohio with him. At that point, she asked him if he had any regrets, and he said he had no feelings about it whatsoever. He seemed perfectly normal, said Habash. The killing didn't bother him in the least. Habash didn't know whether to believe Small's murder confession until she heard a radio broadcast that a woman had been found in her Northwest home, beaten to death. When Habash told him what she had heard, Small just looked at me and said he thought I was bullshitting. She asked him what time he went to the victim's apartment. He said 8 p.m., that he had stayed 20 minutes, left, then came back to torch and fire the apartment. But the ambulance and the police were already there. Habash and Small were captured when they returned to the Canterbury apartments. True to form, Small made wild efforts to escape capture. Realizing policemen were inside the complex, Small fled to the car. In the nick of time, another police vehicle sped into the parking lot and blocked the Chevrolet's exit. Small jumped out and ran toward the apartments. The officer yelled, "Stop or I'll shoot." Small never broke stride, and the officer ran after him. Surrounded by officers, Small was finally restrained and shoved, still struggling, into the back of a police car. After a short handcuffed drive in a separate car to police headquarters at 7th Avenue and Washington Street, Habash immediately dropped the dime on Small. On August 4, 1977, Small got his wish. 12 jurors heard his story. The same story he would have told Sandra Day O'Connor if she had granted his request for a personal conference. The same story his attorney rejected. The same story Detective Quaife ignored when Small offered to solve 10 unsolved murders. To common sense, Small's story proved him insane. In the legal sense, it did not. Defense attorney Bryce Bueller, now relegated to an advisory role since Small was acting as his own lawyer, set the day's ground rules for Wayman Small's delusional monologue by saying, "Your Honor, if I might interject at this point, I have advised Mr. Small, in light of representing himself, I feel a proper way for him to proceed would be in narrative form to simply recall the facts surrounding this case and directing it to the jury, since he cannot very well pose questions of himself and answer them himself." Judge O'Connor agreed. "I know of no other way to do it." With this open-ended entree, Small began an uninterrupted spiel lasting all day. His phantasm started in 1968 when he met his father's 75-year-old friend, Mr. Jackson, who ran a dude ranch. Jackson propositioned Small to transport cars from California to Phoenix for $100 a run. It would be a full-time job. I would have no say-so over what I did. I would have to obey the orders regardless of what the orders were, and at any time I showed any reluctance to obey such orders, they would not hesitate to kill me. I was 22 years old and didn't care a damn if the sun didn't come up the next day. I thought I was one of the toughest son of a bitches that walked the face of this earth. I took the proposal for $100,000 a year, no questions asked. Small became part of Black Hand's personal organization. Small's initiation into Black Hand's group sounded like a medieval rite of passage, complete with modern touches like truth serum, psychological profiles, and delectable female assistants serving as Satan's handmaidens, just like Goldfinger's vamps in the James Bond flick. Irene was the name of Black Hand's female consort. After Black Hand's men picked up Small in a 1966 Lincoln Continental, like Odd Jobs and Goldfinger, they blindfolded him, drove him around for hours, and took him to a tunnel with an elevator shaft. Irene showed Small to the dormitory where other men were being evaluated by doctors, and Irene, using psychological profiles and hypnosis, drugs, basically sodium pentothal, and lie detector tests. They would know at all times what you were thinking and what you were doing. As part of his indoctrination, Small claimed he listened to tapes describing murder, kidnap, arson, extortion, and bribery of high officials committed by Black Hand's organization. From these tapes, he learned about people marked for death and people that were marked to be set up. Small told the jury he'd offer to help Detective Quaife clear up unsolved murder cases by telling him what he had learned during his indoctrination. According to Small, Quaife investigated and found out it was absolutely true, that in fact these murders had been committed and were unsolved. I offered to do what I could if necessary to clear up as many of these past homicides as I could recall, and if necessary, which I didn't mention this part to Detective Quaife, I would submit to hypnosis, and I have 100% recall under such conditions. Small said Detective Quaife turned on him and convinced the county attorney that I may have committed these crimes. Small asked to talk with the county attorney, but Mr. Braden would have nothing to do with me. This rejection led Small to his last resort. He wrote Judge O'Connor and requested a personal interview, but because of the rules of procedure that she is bound, she couldn't grant me that interview. Unable to convince Detective Quaife or to get the county attorney or Judge O'Connor to hear him out, Small couldn't even get his own lawyer to believe him, and he had insisted upon portraying Small as insane and deluded. In spite of rejection from all corners, Small told the jury he valiantly persisted in his quest to tell his story. Small enjoyed the spotlight, and he scanned the courtroom looking for any sign that the judge, the jurors, the bailiff, or the lawyers were taken in by his story. Behind a facade of outward calm, his cunning mind calculated the scene, looking out for the slightest opening for an escape route, for a fleeting moment when he could throttle his captors, seize a gun, take a hostage, and break out of his bondage. Small told the jury about his job's excellent perks. Girls were available for the needs of the men anytime they wanted. If the girls didn't consent to total submission, there was always girls to take to their place. Black Hands confronted one of these sexual objects, snatched her heart from her chest, literally pulled it out, and told another girl to eat it. Black Hands hit her and knocked her silly. He had a pit in one of the back rooms about as long as that table sitting there and twice as wide. It was made of glass. At the bottom of that pit, there was sand and nothing but ants. And he put her in there screaming and suffering. He liked that. While this girl was in the pit screaming, he was having sex with a third woman. He had two of the guys hold her legs, and kept telling him to pull her legs and spread them, make her holler, make her scream, make her suffer until he took a knife and went to cutting on her. Finally, he killed her. Irene noticed the way I was looking at Black Hands and said, "I guess you think it's pretty sick, don't you, Wayman?" I just told Black Hands, "You're a sick motherfucker." He hit me with his open hand. Normal people out here in society can't believe what goes on down there in the penitentiary, so it's hard for them to open their minds and believe what I'm telling them. Anyway, I felt that I had made a bad mistake when I said that, and I thought he was going to kill me. Irene said, "I don't think Wayman will ever make that mistake again." He took me out. He said, "I want to have a talk with you so that you don't ever make that mistake again. As long as you live, don't ever so much as think that, because if you do, it will be your last thought." We were in the mountains and he put a blindfold on me and we drove about 10 minutes.